to this June webinar on long jump and triple jump. This month's webinar will be led by Evelyn O'Reilly. Evelyn O'Reilly is probably well known to many of you, particularly if you are familiar with juvenile athletics. Evelyn is a former chair of the Juvenile Committee and board member of Athletics Ireland. Evelyn has a long association with Annalee Athletics Club, Evelyn, and Ulster Athletics. In more recent times, Evelyn has been a member of the Technical Committee of Athletics Ireland and is also a World Athletics silver referee, meaning that she is qualified to officiate at international competitions within Europe and internationally. So we'll keep the same format as we have done before. We will, if you have questions, please pop them into the chat. We'll leave time at the end for any questions and open mic. And any questions at all that you have, nothing is too basic or too undetailed. Please feel free to ask anything you like. We are delighted to have the questions. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Evelyn. Evelyn, I accidentally muted you, so you might have to unmute yourself before you begin. The floor is yours.
Right. Okay. You can hear me then, guys?
Yeah.
Jackie, you can hear me there, and can you see my screen?
We can indeed, Evelyn.
That's perfect. Well, welcome everybody. I see lots of faces there who probably know an awful lot more about long and triple jump than I do, but which is great because they can keep us right if we go wrong on this evening's journey. Long jump in particular, I think, is often treated as the entry level officiating. A lot of people get brought in to rake a pit or to, you know, help get it going and find themselves there 5 years later still raking pits, but they also will be doing lots of other work as well. So it's one that we kind of assume everything is just there, and because the pit is permanently in position, we don't have to set up any vectors, we don't have to check that things are right, and for that reason some of us might even be aware as to what the actual requirements are for a correct long jump or triple jump, runway, takeoff boards and landing area. So we'll just go through a few of those details very quickly, just so you are aware what they actually should be. You can see there, we're just going to, that's basically what we're going to run through this evening, what we need to actually run a competition. Right. So what's required? A landing pit, preferably a nice soft sand one. But up and down the country, you'll come across a lot of landing pits that have an odd stone and very rough sand and such like, and that is not ideal and quite dangerous for our athletes. So we do have to be careful what the landing pit looks like, and that it is kept clean, that it's not used by various animals for the wrong purposes. So it is important to actually take a look at the sand and make sure things are clean, because people will be landing straight into it. Takeoff boards. There'll be a lot of discussion about takeoff boards in the coming while, because as you've all noticed at our various venues, there actually is quite a few of our boards are not to standard. They don't always fit right. They can wobble and that, so they can be quite tricky. Indicator board, in the past we would have been talking about a plasticine board, which was often our indicator board. Now an indicator board is a board of a different color that creates the contrast between the white takeoff board to delineate the actual line of takeoff. Takeoff cameras, they're on the priority list to be bought, so hopefully we are going to have enough takeoff cameras to actually utilize them for all our national competitions. Takeoff line markers, they're the two little triangular markers that we will use to show the actual takeoff line, and are very important to have during a triple jump, because we will be moving from 9 to 11 to 13 meter boards. So it is important that the takeoff line markers move accordingly to mark where the actual takeoff is for the athlete approaching. Wind gauge and wind sock, measuring tape, spike, EDM if available. Hopefully again in the coming months we're hoping to get some more equipment so that we should have EDM available for our national competitions, but of course we do need people to train up on their actual usage. Judge then needs to have flags, a red and a white flag, and the countdown clock operator needs to have a yellow flag. A cone, which we'll be using just to indicate when the land pit is prepared, ready for the next jump. So the cone will be put down in between jumps. Countdown clock, athlete seating, judges seatings, rake, shovel, brush, and the water container. Water container, particularly indoors, to dampen the sand, to keep it a little bit moist so that it's not flying around all the place. And then the markers are for the athletes to use on the runways. The pit itself, minimum requirement is that it should be 2.75 to 3 meters wide. Now, the reason we should be aware of this is that we use various facilities that have bigger pits. For instance, now think about the back pit in the indoor and the NIA in Dublin. So you can actually, and you should, create a mark either side to create a pit no wider than 3 meters. Because if you think about it, every time an athlete attempts long jump, they should jump to the same, the pits should all be of a standard size. So if you're allowing an athlete to jump into a pit that is wider than 3 meters, if they're falling to the side or whatever, they're going to get valid jumps that actually aren't valid, because if they were in a correct size pit, they would actually be touching the area outside the pit, which in some circumstances could be a foul. So you can use the webbing tape, the white webbing tape that we use to mark vectors for those. You can create an actual mark with them to delineate the actual correct width of your pit. The runway, usually tartan, should be at least 40 meters long, and in some places it would be preferable for them to be up to 45 meters long. But again, that's dependent on who built the track and how it was designed. The runway width is 1.22 meters, which is standard across all long jump runways. The takeoff board for long jump would be positioned between 1 and 3 meters from the pit. For instance, now the front long jump in the NIA in Dublin is actually at the 3 meter mark, which is not ideal for small children. Talking about under 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s. So you have to be careful too when you're planning an event that you know where the board is relative to the actual landing area when you're deciding what pit to use or how you're designing your competition. Of course, for the triple jump, those boards will be moving out to 11 for ladies and 13 meters for men. And in our national competitions, we use a 9 meter board. And for some of our juvenile competitions, we use a 7 meter board. So there's a lot of toing and froing when it comes to triple jump. The distance between the takeoff board and the end of the pitch is at least 10 meters. So you can see in an indoor facility, by putting the takeoff board 3 meters back from the pit, it means that they can have the actual landing pit size somewhat smaller. So you can see why they choose to actually position the boards in different places. The surface of the sand must be smooth and level with the surface of the takeoff board. Now, this is a big issue around all of our facilities, is a lot of places don't actually have enough sand in them. So when you're preparing, the team of officials who will be there a good hour before the competition is due to start to get the area prepped, you may need to actually dig and move the sand to bring it to a position where you can get the front part of the pit as close to the surface, as close to that level as you can. Not always an easy job, but you do want to make sure that it is close to the surface of the actual ground, or at least to the level of the ground. If the sand is low, the jump will be measured as more than it really is. And if the sand is too high, the competitor will lose some distance when their jump is measured. So while I said it's often entry level to bring in somebody to rake the pit, actually raking a pit is quite a skillful job, and it does need to be done carefully. So it's not just a case of you know, lash in there and rake out a bit of sand. You do want to actually think about what you're doing and that you're getting it level, so that every athlete in the competition has the same opportunity to get their jump measured accurately. The sand has to be dug, soft and moist, and there should be no stones or no foreign bodies in the actual sand pit. So it's worthwhile having a little check through before a competition starts to make sure that it's in good nick. This is just a diagram of what we have. You can see there that actual blue line is the actual takeoff line. So it's the imaginary line between the takeoff board and what used to be the plasticine indicator, which is now the contrast board. And as I've said there, note that the middle of the runway, if the middle of the runway is not in the middle of the sand pit, it is necessary to actually create, by using tapes that actually have, you're aiming to have the center of the runway as the center part of your landing area. Okay, takeoff boards, as we said, they're the bane of our lives at the moment. The takeoff board itself should be white in color, and then the indicator board should be a contrast color. In these two instances, you can see that the contrast board is black, the track is red, the takeoff board is white. So the athlete's been given the best opportunity there to be able to pick their takeoff point, and that's very important. And also in the picture on the left, you can see the indicator, those two triangles that give the athletes a visual as to the actual takeoff point, takeoff line. Picture on the right, this shows our new technology. It's a little takeoff camera with a very at-risk laptop sitting on the box. I hope the whole thing doesn't go crashing down. But this is the sort of new technology that we really should be using at all of our competitions, because it is going to be more accurate. Best will in the world, you know, human error. You can make mistakes when you're judging a takeoff line. And when you're there for a full day of national juvenile indoors, it's a long day, it's a lot of competition. So we are very much looking forward to being fully equipped with takeoff cameras and the associated hardware and software that needs to go with it. The other nice joy about having the camera is that if an athlete comes and asks, it's very easy to actually give them the full visual, and it's much quicker than going looking for the mark in the plasticine and having to re-roll your plasticine after. So it is actually a marvelous piece of technology, and we look forward to using it more. Having said that, if we don't have access to cameras, you can still use the plasticine board. So the diagram on the left, as you look at the picture, is actually showing with the plasticine board. The plasticine sits 7 millimeters higher than the actual takeoff board, and the plasticine is held at a 90-degree angle. Heretofore it was a 45-degree angle, but that changed about 3 years ago. So you can still use a plasticine board, and there's not that many in action anymore, but if you have access to one and it's in good condition and you can get the whole thing leveled up and in the right position, and you don't have a camera, it's perfectly right and good to use the plasticine, because it does make judging easier, and also it is excellent to be able to show an athlete where they actually have broken the line. So it is a good piece of technology. The diagram on the other side is the takeoff board with just a blanking board, which is the contrast color. And as you can see, the blanking board is flush with the takeoff board. There's no extra little lift as there is on a plasticine board. So that's our takeoff boards. The other piece of equipment that you should always be using with your long jump outdoors is the wind gauge. We use it in both long and triple jump. It's placed 20 meters from the takeoff line. It's not more than 2 meters away from the runway, and it's positioned at the height of a lane, which is 1.22 meters. The wind speed is read for 5 seconds from the time the athlete passes the 40-meter mark, or 35 in triple jump. Or if they have a shorter run up, you start the wind gauge recording as they start their run up. It will run for 5 seconds and automatically cut off. The wind gauge operator and recorder will have their own score sheet. We look forward to the day that all of this thing will be electronic and we'll all be filling in our little tablets and everything will be automatic. But for now, there will be a second score sheet per se that the wind gauge operator will have, and they will record the wind speed, velocity for each athlete for each jump. It's read meters per second, and as you can see in there, it's rounded off. So a plus 2.03 meters per second will be recorded in the next full number, which is 2.1 meters per second. And if it's a minus, if it's a headwind coming against them, again, it's rounded up per se. So a 2.0 through minus 2.03 will become a minus 2.0. It is very important to record the wind velocities as a performance that has a wind speed of more than positive 2 meters per second can't be ratified for a record and is not going to be valid if a team is being selected. A positive of over 2 meters per second means that that's not actually, it's considered too assisted to be considered for selection on teams and make qualifying standards. So the wind gauge is an important feature and should be used in all of our outdoor competitions. Position of judges, and again, this is in the ideal world where we have lots of judges. Doesn't always happen at some of our competition, but the chief judge will be overseeing the entire competition as such. And then there will be a takeoff judge. In fact, I just realized now looking at this slide, they have the chief judge sitting watching the takeoff line with the measurement judge. We haven't actually sketched in where our camera operator would be sitting, but they would be sitting close to the takeoff line as well, where they can alert the judge as to whether there has been a break or not. We have the recorder, we have an athlete control judge, an area for the athletes to sit. There's a plasticine repair judge. Again, this is an old slide. Hopefully we won't be using them too much. That'll actually become the camera operator. And then the measurement judge, who at the landing pit will be there with a spike and a tape, or will be holding the prism to be used with the electronic device. And then the sand leveler is the old-fashioned person with the rake, keeping everything tidy. We have a countdown clock which has to be visible to the athlete. So the countdown clock operator will be that little bit further away from the runway so that the athlete can get a good visual of what time is left on the clock before they take their judge. So as we say, in an ideal world, you'd actually have a referee. In general, in Ireland, we don't have a specific referee for each event. We will have an overall field referee who you will refer to if you actually need to have any extra adjudication, or if you need to ratify a new record, or to oversee the measurement of a championship best performance or a new record. So the field referee will fill that position. The judge with the flags, who will indicate a valid jump or a foul. The camera judge, who will be, letting the judge with the flags know whether there has been a break or not on the takeoff line. Recorder, you'll have 2 in the landing area with rakes and perhaps even a brush or whatever else is needed to keep things tidy. And then there will be 1 in the landing area, spelled incorrectly, I see, to spike and pull the tape through. Wind gauge operator, the countdown clock operator, and in an ideal world, you'd have another judge that was in charge of an athlete, as you imagine, and you have all had to do this, we don't have that many people at all of our competitions. So some of these judges will be doubling up. So what is a valid jump? The athlete approaches, must take off from the board before the takeoff line, and they must land in the landing area. The actual judge, the entire jump can't be judged until the athlete has left the landing area. And only at that point can the judge raise the white flag to say that it's a valid trial and that it will be measured. So what can't you do? So what is a failure on the takeoff line? When taking off, prior to the instant at which they cease contact with the takeoff board or ground, they break the vertical plane of the takeoff line with any front part of their takeoff foot shoe, whether running up without jumping or in the act of jumping. So little picture there, the top one, the guy's blue foot is just behind the line between the red and white, which is the actual takeoff line. And in the second one, we can see that he has actually stepped over, and that is a foul. Other failures then, he or she can't touch the ground between the takeoff board and the pit. Now this is for long jump only. Of course, in triple jump, they have to touch the ground. So in long jump, you can't touch the ground again from once you've taken off until you've actually landed in the landing pit. You're not allowed to employ any form of somersaulting whilst running up or in the act of jumping. Then on landing, in the course of landing, it is a foul to touch the ground outside the pit behind the nearest break in the sand, i.e. that is that if you touch the area outside the landing pit with any part of your body, behind where the athlete actually broke the sand, that is constituted as a foul. And it is also a failure to walk back through the sand before you have left the pit. Okay, so just to explain this properly, once the athlete has created a break in the sand, which is from the point from which it shall be measured, they must not step back through the sand as they're leaving. If they do so, that is a failure. Now, if they leave the pit correctly and then step back in, that is not a foul. It's their first exit from the landing pit. So when you're leaving, as described here, when leaving the landing area, an athlete's first contact by foot with its border or the ground outside shall be further from the takeoff line than the nearest break in the sand, i.e. the point where the athlete actually broke the sand on their landing, inside the landing area. So yeah, we can discuss that. If people don't understand what that is, I'll show you a picture of it now, it'll come up. So the first contact is considered leaving the pit. And as I said, it's not a foul to walk back into the pit when you've left it correctly. So, right, just on this picture here, you can see, if you look at G, which is the top set of footprints, that's what we're actually talking about in that jump. So G broke the sand further away. Actually, he broke the sand probably around where E was, but then he stood up and proceeded to walk back through the sand. So he actually fouled his jump by doing that. Okay, so that's what we mean by the first leaving the landing pit. How to measure a horizontal jump. The jumps are measured from the nearest break in the landing area made by any part of the body. So if the athlete lands and they overbalance and put back their hand or their elbow, or they fall back on their shoulder, it is the point that they break the sand that is closest to the takeoff line, that is the point at which you're going to measure. The spike is put onto the point where the sand is broken, and or the prism if you're using an electronic device, And the spike, you should have the 0 mark on the actual break point in the sand. So the 0 of the tape is held on that break in the sand, and the tape is then pulled back through to the takeoff line perpendicularly and the measurement recorded. You can see here that we deal in whole centimeters. So in this instance, the athlete has jumped 5 meters, and the red line there is the actual takeoff line, and you can see it falls at 59.6 as such of a centimeter. You actually round down to the last whole centimeter. So that would be recorded as 5.59, not 60. You don't ever round up, so you always round down to the last whole centimeter. The measurement, you measure all jumps unless the rules have been impinged and a red flag has been raised. Never measure a foul jump unless there's an immediate oral protest. Now, with the cameras, it's much easier to actually show an athlete that there is definitely a break. But in the old days with plasticine, sometimes there'd be a little bit of toing and froing to actually establish what his break point was, that he had broken it. And an athlete could actually be claiming that it wasn't a foul. But it's much clearer now with the camera technology for the actual takeoff line. And so a foul, once it is a foul, you don't measure it. Now, I suppose there could be an instance where an athlete would ask to compete for it to be measured under protest until such time as he had a chance to appeal a decision. So in that instance, you could actually measure it until the athlete has a time to appeal whatever the decision is that he is not agreeing with. But in general, fouls are quite transparent and obvious. So we don't get that many instances of athletes asking for things to be measured under protest in long jump. So you place the 0 on the nearest mark left by the athlete in the sand to the takeoff line, and the tape then is pulled back. So again, just the tape is pulled back in as straight a point from where the athlete broke the sand to perpendicular to the takeoff line. Now, in some instances, if an athlete has jumped to the one side or the other, we will take an extra bridge and create an extension of the takeoff line so that the tape can be pulled back straight and true from the break point to measure their jump fairly. So you can see there in this diagram, there's a black dotted line. So that's where they've actually extended out the takeoff line in order to measure the, we'll say take F there, for instance. F had a clean takeoff from the takeoff line, but he landed very far over to the right-hand side of the pit, even to the extent that he actually placed his hand on the landing area outside, on the area outside the landing pit. But you can see there that the tape was pulled back perpendicularly to an extension to the takeoff line. And that is done for all of the jumps. There's a few little scenarios on this slide, and you can take a chance to opportunity to go back through it later on if you so wish. As Jackie says, these slides will all be up on the website. So just looking at A there, A ran true and straight and landed in a lovely straight down from the middle of the pit. So that's a valid trial. You measure from the takeoff to the point in the sand closest to the takeoff line. In B, again, they took off correctly, but they landed to the left-hand side. So they're going to measure that to an extended line taken out from the takeoff line. C is, again, you can see C here took off way before the board. That's absolutely valid. There's no problem there. He's just not as efficient as he should have been. And again, he landed in the sand. So we will measure from the takeoff line to the point break in the sand. Now, there is a bit of chat going on about getting rid of the actual takeoff line and measuring long jump from where the person takes off. But that hasn't actually come in yet, but I believe that's a rule change that's been discussed. But for now, we have a takeoff line, and that's where we measure from, except when we're dealing with the 9, 10s and 11s, where we do take, we measure from where their foot, we don't, it's not a foul to break the takeoff line, is what I'm going to say. You can measure from where they actually did take off. Even if it's somewhere like, in this instance, the little foot D in an under 9s and 10s competition, you would measure from the tip of that toe mark to where D actually broke the sand. It's not shown in this one because for an adult competition, this is, sorry. Oh, okay.
And Evan, just while you're organising your slides there, we've popped into the chat just a couple of images from recent international competitions, which show how close a foul jump can be, and how useful the camera can be. And just to reiterate that, you know, the rule that now exists is about the breaking the plane and at the final contact. So you can see very clearly that while this athlete may have been behind the plane when they landed and planted their foot on the first image in the chat, as they rolled up, they broke the plane and were still in contact with the ground. So that was a foul. So and very marginal as it was, but and why the cameras are, you know, are absolutely vital now, and becoming more and more accessible. Really, they're becoming more affordable as well. So we're likely to see them more commonly.
I suppose the other thing to say there that I believe if your shoelace the plane, it is not considered a foul. It actually has to be the front of your shoe, your foot, that actually breaks the plane.
Yeah, it's not the extraneous bits and pieces.
Yeah.
We'll throw another picture in there that shows just how close it can be. Also, 0.1 of a centimeter a valid jump. So the third one is
you
valid.
Can see just how difficult that would have been to do with the naked eye. You know, it's a very tough job to actually judge the takeoff line with naked eye. So I think the camera is definitely the way forward, and I look forward to having them at all our competitions. So just to continue there then, D is a straight foul here. He took off after the takeoff line, so his red flag not measured. Athlete E took off okay. His foot was on the takeoff point, fine. He didn't break the plane, but when he landed, his hand, as you can see on the top of that landing zone, he put his hand down on the area outside the landing zone, closer to the takeoff line than the point where he actually had broken the sand. So that actually is classified as a foul. So E would have been a red flag, and his jump would not have been measured. On the other side, F touched the area outside of the landing zone, but because his hand touched further away than the break line in the sand, that is a valid, and his measurement would have been taken and recorded. And you do need to have contact with the white takeoff board as you take off. You can see here athlete H actually had his foot completely outside the board. So therefore that's considered a foul, and he would have had a red flag and would not have been measured. If even part of the foot is in contact with the white takeoff board, you can measure. It is a valid trial. But if he is not in contact with the takeoff board, that is a foul. Okay, recording. The person responsible is the recorder. So for the final result, each competitor will be accredited with the best of all the trials. The measurements are recorded in meters and centimeters. A mark an X as a fail. If the athlete passed, did not jump, it's a dash. If the athlete has fouled on all 3 of their opening jumps, you record them as no mark. So they had no valid trial recorded. DQ, as is used in all events if an athlete is disqualified for any reason, and a small r if the athlete retired from the event, whether it be through injury or whether they had a second event that they were not able to actually get back in time to take their trial and actually come to you and say, look, I'm going to retire from this event because it's clashing and I'm going to a different event. Just when we are recording, in the case if a championship best performance has been achieved, it has to be ratified. So it must be measured by a certified steel tape or by the certified electronic device. So on our scorecards, normally we will have the current record recorded on the top of the score sheet. And if you see that an attempt has broken the record, you should maintain the break point. Do not start raking until such time as you can get the steel tape out and call over the referee. And the performance must be ratified by at least 3 of the judges, plus the including the field referee, who will sign off to say that it was correctly ratified and correctly measured. Now, this is becoming more and more important as people are going to different competitions to get standards for international competition. So we do need to be careful how we record, how we record all of an athlete's trials, and that we verify that each judge, that we check our results before we send them in, that we have actually given an athlete their best trial. So it's important that we do it correctly and take a bit of time with it. Competing order, the original order will come drawn by lot. So when the scorecard comes down to you, that'll be your starting order, and that will have been drawn by lot randomly by the computer when they were setting it up. All the athletes are entitled to at least 1 trial, 2 preferably, and depends on how much time you have there. It is preferable that athletes take their warm-up trials in the order of the competition. Warm-up must be supervised by officials. You can't just have athletes wandering in and running around taking their jumps willy-nilly. It's important that it's kept safe and that it is supervised. Athletes are given an opportunity to measure run-ups, and that is all facilitated before the competition starts. So for that reason, when we're organising competitions, it's important that we remember that it will take, if you've 30 to 40 under 11 doing long jump, it's going to take a few minutes for all of them to get their marks. So you have to allow, when you're timetabling, that you give chance for a decent time for warm-up, particularly for large of athletes. During competition, then, they must compete in the order as it comes down. If there are more than 8 athletes, 3 trials will be given to each athlete, and then after 3, the top 8 athletes will then be given an additional further 3 trials. If there are less than 8 athletes, you can give all of the athletes their 6 trials. Competition order then will reverse when we have got our top 8 athletes. They will then jump in reverse ranking after the first 3 rounds, and then they can also be reversed in the final round, so that we have the best performances. The athlete with the best performance should be the last athlete to actually jump in the competition. In the case where a long jumper is involved in another event simultaneously, and this goes for all of the field events, as we've discussed at other webinars, they can ask permission to, well, they must ask permission. If they're going to leave the competition, they must ask permission to leave the competition and let the chief judge know that they're going to compete in a sprint or a hurdles or whatever else they're going to go and do. It is at the discretion of the judge whether they can be reorganized in the order, and in general we do facilitate an athlete. So if an athlete comes back when the round is still on, so if they've left at the beginning of the second round and they come back before we finish the second round, we can facilitate and let an athlete take their jump out of order. Now that permission only lasts for that 1 round of trials. They can't go away and then come back a couple of rounds later. they must ask each time they want to leave. So if they come back and say, look, I haven't, my heat got held up, I haven't been able to actually run yet. Round 2 is now finished. They've had to pass on that round because they weren't there. But they must ask permission again if they want to be gone for, we'll say, round 3. If they have asked permission and they come back before the end of round 3, they can be facilitated and allowed to take their trial out of order. If an athlete has not returned, so they have left during the second round, they don't return at the end of the second round, they arrive back in the end of round, well, they haven't arrived back, and round is going on, the officials should call their number, run the clock, giving them their minute to turn up, and if they haven't, that trial will be classified as a fail for the point of view of the scorecard. If in round 2, when they have permission to leave, again, you call their number at the end of the round. If they haven't come back, you mark them down as a pass. But for the subsequent rounds, if they're not back, it's a failed attempt. In the event of a tie, so if the 2 best performances of 2 or more, if the best performance of 2 or more athletes is the same, you go and then look at their previous next best performance. Again, if that is still a tie, you go to the next jump and the next jump. In long jump, you will normally be able to divide them if you go far enough back down. But if you've only had 3 rounds and 2 athletes have the same performance, it is possible, if you can't divide them, if their second, we'll say they both fouled on their first round and then they have jumped the exact same in round 2 and round 3, both athletes could be put forward to the final 8. So you actually could have 9 athletes going forward in certain instances. All right. And likewise, if it's for medals and you can't resolve the tie, then the tie remains. But it would be highly unlikely in long jump for that to occur. Time allowed. So the time allowed for initiation your trial is 1 minute from when your name has been called. Now, it's up to us as officials to be careful when we actually call the name, that when we call them, that the landing area is prepared, that the area is safe and ready for the athlete to come to take their jump. So once their name is called, that is the beginning of the 1 minute countdown. The countdown judge should have a yellow flag, and for the last 5, he should raise the yellow flag when there are 15 seconds left, to indicate to the athlete that they only have 15 seconds left. The countdown clock must be visible to the athlete, so just have to be careful about the sighting of it. I know in indoors, particularly in Athlone, it gets very busy. You could perhaps have a pole vault going on, and you have both pits either end being used for a long jump, and you've a lot of athletes over and back, and the track is in full use, and you've got officials stepping in and out. So just have to be careful where we sight the countdown clock to make sure that the athletes can actually see it. So horizontal jumps, it doesn't change depending on the number of athletes. And also, you can see there for a consecutive trial, the minutes. It's very rare in long jump to actually have a scenario where you have a consecutive trial. But it could happen in a scenario where we've had a technical failure. Something's happened and the power of the EDM is dropped, and an athlete has started the trial, taken a jump, and we can't actually record it. And in that instance, you might allow the athlete to take a retrial. So that would be a consecutive jump. Outdoors, I've seen it. Dog gets into the track and runs across in front of an athlete as they're approaching to take their jump. In that instance, it would be only fair to give the athlete time to regroup and give them a chance. So in those instances, you may have to give more time. That's where that's the kind of instances where you would get a consecutive trial. But in long jump in general, we don't have that scenario happening, except for the athlete who left the competition and who's first in the round and they came back at the end of round 2 and took their round 2 trial, and then they're called first to jump in round 3. So again, in that instance, there could be given a little extra time to initiate their trial. Markers. Each athlete is entitled to have 2 markers, which should be supplied by the organisers. The markers shall be composed of a single piece only. In other words, they can't be big flappy things that are sort of stacked up at the side of the track. If the markers are not supplied by the event organisers, they can use adhesive tape, but they can't use chalk or anything else that leaves an indelible mark on the track. So they can't use their shoe or their water bottle or their sports bag. You know, so you can't let them have a whole load of stuff stuck on the side of the runway. It's unsafe and it's not right. So it's incumbent on us as event organisers to make sure we have proper markers available to the athletes and to ask them to pick them up when they're finished and put them back in whatever receptacle we're storing them in at the time. Triple jump. Triple is a hop, step, and a jump in that order. The hop is made so that the athlete lands on the same foot as the foot they took off with. In the step, he lands on his other foot. So if he hopped on his left foot, he will step and land on his right foot, and then he will initiate his jump from his right jump until he lands. If that sequence is not followed, it is a failure. Judging triple jump can be quite challenging because some athletes in their hop phase will actually do a type of cycle motion, which you sometimes would do a double take and say, well, hang on a second, is he actually on the same foot as he took off with? So you do have to watch them quite carefully. And I know there's various people on this call who are much more experienced at doing this, but particularly when you start watching triple jump, it's important to really concentrate and be very careful and follow the sequence of the event. Because you don't want to call a foul when it's not a foul, but you also don't want an athlete doing the event incorrectly. The takeoff boards then for men are 13 meters from the landing pit and 11 meters for women. And as I said before, in our national competitions, we also have a 9-meter takeoff board. Technically, we're supposed to move the board for each athlete. So this is one instance where you might actually reorder the order that the athletes compete in, because it's not outside the realm of reason to put the 9-meter jumpers one after another and then 7-meter jumpers in sequence as well, so that we're not having to actually, well, particularly when it's 11 meters and 9 meters and 11 and 13 for the men, you don't want to be having to boards each time. And by right, we should be putting a blank board in and then using the correct takeoff board at whatever point that the athlete is jumping from. At the beginning of the competition, you'd normally ask an athlete what board they want to go from. They can indicate what they want to go from, but they do have the right to let you know during the competition that they might like to switch from a 13-meter back to an 11-meter, or from 11-meter back to a 9-meter, or whatever, and can be facilitated. But you then can't start changing competition order. So once you've set the order of the competition, you should continue in that order, even if the athletes change what board they want to take off from. Sorry, went the wrong way. Little visual, and in this instance, the athlete has very kindly worn one black shoe and one white shoe, which makes life just a little bit easier for us to watch. That in the hop sequence, he took off on his white foot and he landed on his white foot. So that is correct. But as you can see in B and C, the athlete is actually cycling through in his hop mechanism, and that can be quite, some athletes will have a very fast motion, and it can be quite hard to actually work out what exactly they're doing. Step is then an awful lot easier because he has landed on his right foot and he's taking off, and he's now going to land on his black foot at the end of the step, and then he initiates his jump from taking off from the foot with the black shoe, and he's landing in the landing pit. That's the correct sequence of a triple jump. The basic setup is similar to the long jump, except that we have the options of the different boards, the different meters of boards, the 11, 13, and the 9. Again, just be careful, depending on where you are, that you have centered the landing area centered relative to the runway, so that the midline of the runway is the midline of the landing area. Again, the wind gauge will be set up at 35 meters, and it will run for 5 seconds. Again, we'll start it when the athlete initiates the run, or it depends on how long a run up they're doing, but that judge will be sitting, well, it's the same sighting as we discussed in the long jump. It's 2 meters from, no more than 2 meters from the side of the runway, and the wind gauge will be at 122 meters high. Assistance, or what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Officials are not allowed to give advice or support that's not related or required by their specific role in the competition. That's not allowed, except in horizontal jumps, to indicate a failure. An athlete has the right to ask where he broke on the takeoff point, and if you're using a camera, you can show them the image, or if you're using the older plasticine board, you can show the break point on the plasticine. So the athlete is entitled to see that. Athlete can't have any electronic transmitters, CDs, radios, everything else, as is with all of our athletes in our competition area, not allowed. Athletes are allowed to communicate with their coaches. They may approach their coach and speak to them. They may view a video. The rule has changed. They can actually take the viewing device into their own hand, but they can't then walk into the competition area with it. They can hold the camera or the laptop or the tablet or whatever it's on, but they can't go walking around the place with it. They must hand it back to their coach again. That is allowed. And I suppose one of the things to think about is that we should actually create areas where we allow coaches or a parent or whatever to be standing, which is in a position where an athlete can approach them without crossing the track or without getting in the way of another athlete in a different competition. And we've all seen what Athlone is like on a busy day. So we do have to be careful, and athletes have to be warned to be careful about, attempting to cross a track when a race is going on. And they must follow the advice of the judges. They must be mindful. If they're told not to cross, they should not cross. And sort of crossing and putting themselves in danger or impeding another athlete is actually bad sportsmanship, and could be an instance where you would actually give a yellow card for bad behavior if they're not following the advice of the judges. So just keep an eye on what's going on. They're not allowed to leave the competition area, and it's a bit of a bugbear in Athlone, particularly at the high jump, where the athletes wander off and actually leave the designated competition area to speak to their coaches and to view their cameras. We have to be mindful of that as well and keep an eye on what's happening over there. Should an athlete become unwell or need treatment, they can be actually medical treatment or can be provided in the competition area by the staff appointed by the organisers. So that's pretty much all the assistance they can give or they can get. Triple jump failures, the same rules apply, particularly in the landing area, as do for the long jump that we've discussed. It is not a failure if, while jumping, the athlete touches the ground with the sleeping leg, as in during the hop phase, if whilst he's hopping, he touches the ground with the leg he's not hopping from, or during the step. Some people get a little bit uptight about that and you know, feel that it's a foul, but it's not. It's not actually a foul if he does touch. It is not a foul if he touches the white lines or the ground between the takeoff line and the landing area, because he actually has to initiate all phases of the triple jump. He must touch the ground, having taken off at the takeoff line. Now, it's not a foul if the athlete lands in the pit in the step phase through no fault of their own. So in other words, they jumped off the wrong board because the judge didn't show where the 9-meter board was, or we'll say they were aiming to jump off an 11-meter board, but we had left the markers on the 9-meter board, and that they jumped off a 9-meter board and ended up not having enough room to finish the 3 phases of the triple jump. Likewise, it is actually a foul if they don't get as far as the landing area. So it's a failure if they land the jump not within the landing area, which is the sand pit in this instance. So if they land outside it, to the side of it, or if they don't actually make it as far as the pit, that is a foul. Quick word about shoes, and I'm not going to have much chat about this because it's a bit of a minefield. Do you see there, the link is up there for the World Athletics Shoe Checker tool, which we're probably all going to have to start checking in on this to see what's happening. But this is a particular shoe that has now been identified as being unauthorized, and for the duration that they're being given time to actually make it compliant. And during that time, the athletes are going to be allowed to wear a sock liner with this particular shoe, the Adizero triple jump pole vault shoe, so to make it compliant. So from now until the 1st of July 2024, they can use the shoe as long as they're wearing the specific liner. And from the 2nd of July onwards, until the end of until the 1st of July, they can still wear the shoe, even though it's not authorized. And then after the 2nd of July, they'll have to wear it with the sock liner. I suppose, like everything else, the Adidas are probably, you know, asking to be given time to actually correct what is making it unauthorized. So, but just, you'll see these messages come from World Athletics every now and then. Keeping up with it is quite a challenge. So it's probably no harm to go in on the World Athletics Shoe Checker tool every now and then, and see what's coming up. This is a big job for our call room personnel, because they're the ones who actually should be doing all this before the athlete ever gets out as far as the event. Just to be aware that the technology in shoes is exponential. It's moving on quite quickly. So keeping up with it is going to be a bit of a challenge. Okay, that's all I have to give you for the moment. I haven't checked the time. Oh yes, we're running tight to time. So are there any questions in the chat there, Jackie, or have people got questions?
Excellent timing there, Evelyn. Thanks very much. There was one particular one, just to highlight, just again, really a one related to juvenile competition, and where there's a clash of events. They tend to do competitions that might not be aligned very well, but Ronan has written an answer there just about it. An athlete has to leave for another event, and unfortunately, as Ronan explains there in the chat, if anybody wants to look at it, really once the competition has closed and the competition has ended, then the athlete unfortunately doesn't have the opportunity to come back and take other jumps, which, you know, it's a difficult one at juvenile level, but is one really that I suppose we advise that you stick to, because you know, it is a challenge, but we also have to move the competition on. So, you know, the advice there is if they're going away, that the order then is that you let them, before in the first round, take an early jump, take the first jump, and then go away, and at least then they have a jump in, and then hopefully they can get back in time for the other rounds. But once the competition closes, they wouldn't generally be allowed to come back and take jumps. We understand that. I suppose, Evelyn, would you agree that at county and regional level, different regulations might be in place, but it's not something that would happen at national juveniles, and certainly not at senior level.
Yeah, I mean, we have made allowances down the past, but
yeah.
When a competition is ended, you can't let people take jumps. I think, as you said there, the thing to do is, if they've highlighted that they have to go, is let them get their jump in before they start. Before they go away, so that they get at least one jump on the board, and get on the score sheet. Yeah, it's always going to be a difficult one, and no matter how often you do a timetable, you think you're legislating for the normal crossover events, and then you get one that completely throws you, and you go, gosh, I would never put those two events together. So, you'd want to be a mind reader to know what way things will go.
A good question here from Seamus Flynn, and I suppose it's one that's outside the rules and one that's really aligned to the safety of the competition. So in particular with triple jump, is it not unusual to find an athlete turning up who's not competent in the event, and can they insist on being allowed to jump perhaps under protest? Under protest is only something that exists, Seamus, for the rules, and for that they're insisting that the rule hasn't been applied correctly, or that something hasn't been measured correctly. So they wouldn't have under protest, wouldn't be something that they would have recourse to. It's one for a referee, if you'd agree, Evelyn, that if somebody is not competent, it's about safety. And triple jump is one where they would have to be, they do have to be safe.
I mean, when you've an athlete not making the landing pit, which we have seen, and we've seen in adults, I've seen it in university competitions and things, can't let them do it, because they are going to hurt themselves, So you do have to call it at that point. But it's how you manage it is really the important thing, how you deal with the athlete, and point out it's for their safety. You're not just being nasty. Yeah. But you shouldn't get somebody. And likewise, but I'm sure, Seamus, you've seen it in the pole vault. You can't let kids attempt these events if they're not able for them,
Yeah, and the same, I think, it applies at senior level, and probably happens less, but the league is a place where we occasionally get people trying something out. But it's one to be aware of, that safety is the first priority of anybody officiating an event. Another one from Seamus there. If an athlete leaves the competition area after being told by the official, and that they've left in error, and it's the official's error, should they be allowed back into the competition? Yes. If an official has made an error, we have to rectify it. How they're allowed back in then depends on the circumstances. And if less than 8 athletes, but one athlete fouls first 3 jumps, are they allowed 3 more jumps? Yes.
Well, I see Ronan has answered it. He says he would give them he would give the 7 athletes.
Yeah, just answered it there. Yeah,
but
strange one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have 8 or less athletes starting the competition, they all get the full 6.
All get.
Yeah.
If you've more than 8, then they don't.
Just another one on that.
You're trying to get down to the 8.
Follow on that 8 one. If you have put through 8 athletes, and one of them, for whatever reason, injury or conflicting event, chooses to retire, you continue with 7 athletes. You don't pull up number 9.
Yes.
Okay. No. So the 8 qualifying athletes, they're the ones who get the extra 3 jumps. And if they choose not to avail of them, you don't put in somebody else.
I think there was it was interesting on the shoes, Evelyn. I think this is one that we're all grappling with, and really it's something that's not a concern of most juvenile competition. So we're not encouraging anybody, in fact, actively discouraging, I would say, to go around checking juvenile shoes. It's not something that is necessary from a competition point of view at juvenile level, and from a rules level. It is necessary if it's a senior competition, or if an athlete, a younger athlete, is looking for a standard for a championship, such as an under 18s championship, or an EYOF, or that kind of thing. Or if they're eligible for World Juniors or your European Juniors under 20. So, but if it's your under 12s, you don't really need to be checking shoes unless it's unsafe. If there's any other questions there, I realise that we've kind of run quite over time, but as Evelyn said, while it's seen as an entry level posting to officiate long jump, it's actually, there's quite a lot to it, and it's important that it's done well. So I'll just give people just a moment if anybody wants to come off mic or pop anything else into the chat. Thanks for joining in, Ronan. Evelyn or Ronan, any concluding comments? If we have no further questions, I'd just like to say thank you to Evelyn for facilitating it, this webinar this evening. The next one is in July, and we'll cover javelin, and we're looking forward to it. Again, any questions that arise, please drop them on to us, and we'll endeavour to get back to you, or ask us at a competition if you happen to spot us. Thank you very much. And we'll end the webinar now.
Okay, guys. Good night.
Night.
Thanks. See ya.